The rain had been falling since morning, turning the long driveway into a river of mud and fallen leaves. Maria stood in the kitchen of the Ashworth mansion, folding cloth napkins into perfect triangles. Her hands moved automatically after 3 years of doing the same tasks over and over. She didn't mind the work. It was honest, and it paid enough to send money home every month. Through the kitchen window, she could see the white tents being set up on the back lawn. Workers struggled against the wind, fighting to secure the canvas before the evening's event, Mrs. Ashworth's charity gala. The biggest night of the year. Maria had been told to stay late tonight to help with whatever needed doing. Extra hands, they said. Just stay out of sight. The house had been in chaos all week. Flower arrangements arrived daily. The carpet cleaners came twice. A team spent an entire afternoon adjusting the lighting in the ballroom. Maria watched it all from the edges, invisible as always. She'd learned early on that being invisible was part of the job. Rich people didn't want to see the hands that scrubbed their toilets or washed their sheets. They wanted everything perfect, but they didn't want to think about how it got that way. She didn't resent them for it. Not really. This was just how the world worked. Some people had money, some people didn't. Some people played piano in concert halls, and some people cleaned those concert halls after everyone went home. Life had taught her not to expect fairness. The head chef burst through the kitchen door, his face red with stress. Behind him came a line of catering staff carrying trays and boxes. The kitchen exploded into controlled chaos. Ovens hummed. Knives chopped. Someone barked orders about the appetizers. Maria pressed herself against the wall, staying out of the way. Mrs. Ashworth appeared in the doorway, looking like she'd stepped out of a magazine. Her dress probably cost more than Maria made in 6 months. She was on her phone, pacing back and forth, her voice tight with worry. "What do you mean you can't come? The event starts in 3 hours. She listened for a moment, her face going pale. "Food poisoning? But you're our pianist. We specifically hired you because—" She stopped, listening again. Then her shoulders sagged. "Fine. Yes, I hope you feel better." She ended the call and stood there, staring at her phone like it had personally betrayed her. The chef looked up from his work. "Problem?" The pianist canceled. "He's sick." Mrs. Ashworth's voice was thin, stretched tight. "How am I supposed to have a charity gala without music?" The piano is the centerpiece of the whole evening. People donated thousands of dollars expecting an elegant affair, and now we'll just have an empty piano sitting there like a monument to my failure. The chef shrugged. "Maybe play a recording?" Mrs. Ashworth looked at him like he'd suggested serving fast food. "A recording? At a live event? Absolutely not. That would be humiliating." She walked out, already dialing another number. Maria continued folding napkins. She'd heard Mrs. Ashworth make dozens of frantic phone calls over the years. Everything was always a crisis until it wasn't. Someone would fix it. Someone always did when you had enough money. By evening, the house had transformed. The ballroom glowed with golden light from the chandeliers. Fresh flowers covered every surface, filling the air with the scent of roses and lilies. The grand piano stood in the corner, polished until it gleamed. Guests began arriving in expensive cars, stepping carefully around puddles in their designer shoes. Maria had changed into her black uniform, the one reserved for events. She stood near the coat room, ready to help. From her position, she could see into the ballroom. Women in gowns that sparkled like water, men in tuxedos that fit perfectly. Everyone laughing, drinking champagne, pretending they cared about whatever charity this money was supposed to help. She recognized some of the guests from magazines and local news. A real estate developer who owned half the buildings downtown. A lawyer who'd been in the papers for defending some big corporation. A woman who'd inherited her money and spent her time on charity boards. As if giving away a tiny fraction of wealth she'd never earned made her a good person. Maria caught herself and felt guilty for the thought. Who was she to judge? At least they were giving something. That was better than nothing. And their money, however they'd gotten it, kept her employed. It kept her parents fed back home. She had no right to be bitter. The evening wore on. Maria helped with coats, fetched drinks, and cleared empty glasses. She moved through the crowd like a ghost. People looked right through her, continuing their conversations as if she didn't exist. She'd grown used to it. The piano sat silent in its corner. Mrs. Ashworth kept glancing at it, her smile tight. A few guests had asked about the music. She'd made excuses, promised something special later, but Maria could see the worry in her eyes. Around 8 o'clock, Maria carried a tray of dirty glasses through the ballroom. The room had gotten louder as people drank more. Laughter echoed off the high ceilings. Someone had spilled red wine on the carpet. She'd have to clean that later. She passed close to the piano and stopped for just a moment. The instrument was beautiful. Black lacquer that reflected the chandelier light like a mirror. The ivory keys looked untouched, perfect. She could see her reflection in the polished wood, distorted and dark. Without thinking, her fingers moved in the air beside the tray. The muscle memory was still there even after 3 years. The patterns her hands had learned over thousands of hours of practice. Her fingers remembered things her heart tried to forget. A man in a tuxedo noticed her standing there. He nudged the woman next to him and said something Maria couldn't hear. They both looked at her and laughed. The laughter caught the attention of others. Soon 6 people were watching her, amused smiles on their faces. Maria realized what she'd been doing and felt her face grow hot. She started to walk away, but Mrs. Ashworth's voice stopped her. "Maria, wait." She turned slowly. Mrs. Ashworth was walking toward her, hope and desperation mixing on her face. The crowd had gone quiet, sensing something interesting might happen. "Those movements you were making," Mrs. Ashworth said. Do you play piano?" The question hung in the air. Maria wanted to say no, to escape back to the kitchen where she belonged. But something in her refused to lie. She nodded once, barely moving her head. Mrs. Ashworth's eyes went wide. "Really, could you actually play something?" "We're desperate. Our pianist canceled and we have no music and everyone keeps asking and—" She stopped, took a breath. "I know this is unusual, but would you be willing to play? Just for a little while?" Around them, the guests' amusement grew more obvious. Someone chuckled. Another whispered to their companion. The message was clear in their faces. The maid playing piano? This ought to be entertaining. At worst, it would be something to laugh about later. At best, she might manage a simple tune, and they could all feel good about appreciating the help's humble efforts. Maria looked at the piano, then at the faces watching her, then at Mrs. Ashworth, who needed her for the first time in 3 years. She handed her tray to another staff member and walked toward the piano, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. Every step felt strange, like walking through a dream where nothing made sense. 3 years. 3 years since she'd touched a piano. 3 years since she'd allowed herself to even think about the life she'd lost. And now she was walking toward one in front of all these people who saw her as nothing more than someone who cleaned up after them. The piano bench was exactly the right height. Of course it was. Everything in this house was perfect. She sat down slowly, aware of every eye on her. The room had gone completely quiet now. Even the servers had stopped moving, wanting to see what would happen. Maria looked down at the keys. Her hands were shaking. These weren't the soft hands of someone who spent their days playing music. They were rough from cleaning products and hard work. Her nails were short and practical. There was a small scar on her left thumb from where she'd cut herself washing a knife last month. She placed her fingers on the keys and felt the cool ivory beneath them. The touch brought everything back. Every lesson, every performance, every moment she'd sat at a piano and felt like herself. The person she'd been before everything fell apart. Before the economy collapsed. Before she'd lost her apartment, her piano, her entire life. Before she'd gotten on a plane with one suitcase and left everything behind. Someone in the crowd coughed. Another person laughed softly, like they couldn't quite believe this was happening. She heard whispers. "Is she really going to try? This should be good." Poor thing, she has no idea how embarrassing this is going to be. Maria closed her eyes. Her hands stopped shaking. And then she began to play. The first note cut through the room like a knife through. Silk, clear, perfect, impossible, Maria's. Fingers moved across the keys with a certainty that made everyone forget to breathe. This wasn't chopsticks or a simple melody someone might learn from a YouTube tutorial. This was Rachmaninoff, one of the most difficult pieces ever written for piano, and she was playing it like she'd been born to do nothing else. The opening phrases rolled out in waves of sound that seemed too big to come from one instrument. Her left hand thundered through the bass notes while her right hand danced over the melody, with a lightness that seemed to defy physics. The piano sang, it roared. It whispered secrets that made people's chests ache with feelings they couldn't name. In the front row of watching guests, the real estate developer's mouth hung open. The lawyer had set down his champagne glass without realizing it. The society woman who'd inherited her fortune stood frozen, one hand pressed to her pearl necklace like she needed something solid to hold on to. Mrs. Ashworth felt her legs go weak. She'd asked Maria to play, thinking maybe the woman knew a few basic songs, something simple to fill the silence, background music for people to talk over. This wasn't background music. This was the kind of playing that stopped time. The technical skill was staggering. Maria's hands flew across the keyboard, stretching to reach chords that seemed impossible. Her fingers moved so fast they blurred. But it wasn't just speed or accuracy. Anyone with enough practice could learn the notes. What Maria was doing went beyond technique. She was telling a story with every phrase, a story of loss and longing and hope that refused to die no matter how hard life tried to kill it. The music built and built, climbing toward something bigger than the room could hold. Complex runs of notes cascaded like waterfalls. The melody soared above it all, pure and aching. Some guests felt tears forming in their eyes without understanding why. Others stood paralyzed, forgetting about their drinks and conversations and carefully maintained social masks. In the kitchen, the catering staff had stopped working. They stood in the doorway listening. The head chef had tears running down his face and didn't bother wiping them away. One of the young servers whispered, "Who is she?" Nobody answered because nobody knew. They'd all worked alongside Maria for months or years. They'd shared the kitchen, made small talk during breaks, complained about difficult guests. Not once had anyone asked about her life before this job. Not once had anyone wondered if there might be more to her than what they could see. The music swelled into a section that felt like grief itself had learned to speak. Maria's whole body swayed with the emotion of it. Her face remained calm, almost peaceful, but her hands told the truth. They spoke of nights crying alone in a tiny apartment, of saying goodbye to parents at an airport, not knowing when she'd see them again, of packing a lifetime into one suitcase because that's all she could carry, of arriving in a new country where nobody knew her name or cared about the person she used to be. A woman near the back of the crowd was crying openly now. Her husband put his arm around her, his own eyes wet. They didn't know Maria's story, but somehow the music made them feel it anyway. That's what great art does. It bypasses the brain and speaks directly to the heart in a language everybody understands but nobody can explain. The piece moved into a quieter section. Delicate notes floated through the air like snow falling. Maria's touch on the keys became impossibly gentle. Each note hung in the silence before the next one came, creating space for people to remember their own losses, their own moments of standing at the edge of everything they knew and jumping into the unknown. Mr. Ashworth had come in from the study when he heard the music. He stood in the doorway, gripping the frame like it was the only thing keeping him upright. He was 73 years old. He'd heard piano performances at Carnegie Hall, at private concerts in European estates, at the finest venues money could buy. He'd never heard anything like this. The young man who'd first laughed when Maria approached the piano felt sick to his stomach. He was 26, fresh out of business school, working at his father's investment firm. He'd been taught to judge people by their clothes, their connections, their bank accounts. The world had told him those things mattered, and he'd believed it without question. Now he stood watching a woman in a housekeeper's uniform create beauty so profound it made his expensive education feel worthless. Maria's eyes remained closed. She'd left the ballroom behind, left the mansion and the wealthy guests and the life where she was invisible. She was back in Caracas in the small apartment she'd shared with her parents. Her mother's piano stood against the wall, slightly out of tune but loved. She was 22 again, practicing for hours every day, dreaming of concert halls and international tours. The future stretched ahead of her like an open road, and she'd been so certain about where it led. Then the economy collapsed. Then the protests started. Then the government froze bank accounts and the grocery stores ran out of food. Then her piano teacher left the country. Then the conservatory closed. Then one by one, everyone she knew either left or gave up or learned to survive in a world where art didn't matter anymore, because people were too busy trying to eat. She'd held out longer than most, kept practicing even when there was no point, kept believing even when belief felt stupid. But eventually reality won, the way it always does. She sold her mother's piano to buy food, used the money from her last performance to pay for a plane ticket, left everything behind and came here to this country where at least the grocery stores were full, even if nobody knew her name or cared that she'd once been someone. The music shifted again, building back up. The sadness transformed into something fiercer. Determination, survival, the refusal to disappear completely no matter how hard the world tried to erase you. Maria's hands attacked the keys now, pulling sound from the piano that felt like defiance itself, like a person standing up after being knocked down. Like getting out of bed every morning even when you wanted to stay there forever. Like cleaning toilets with a PhD because having a job was better than having pride. Like sending money home to parents who cried on the phone because they missed you, but told you to stay because at least you were safe. The room had changed. It was no longer a ballroom full of wealthy people at a charity gala. It was a church, a temple, a sacred space where something true was happening. The kind of truth that made people uncomfortable because it forced them to see things they usually worked very hard to ignore. One of the servers was filming on her phone.
She knew she wasn't supposed to, but something told her this mattered.
That this was one of those moments that needed to be captured. She held the phone low, trying to be discreet, and prayed her battery would last. The music raced toward its conclusion. Maria's fingers flew across the keys one final time. The melody soared up and up, reaching for something beyond the ceiling, beyond the sky, beyond everything that tried to contain it. Then came the final crashing chords. 1, 2, 3. Each one landing like a statement, like a declaration. Like someone refusing to apologize for taking up space in the world. The last note rang out, vibrating in the air. Then slowly it faded into silence. Maria sat perfectly still, her hands resting on the keys. Her eyes remained closed. She was breathing hard like she'd run a marathon. Sweat gleamed on her forehead. For a long moment, nobody moved. Nobody even breathed. Then someone started clapping. The applause started with one person, then two. Then suddenly the entire room erupted. It wasn't polite charity gala clapping. This was the kind of applause that comes from somewhere deep and real. People clapped until their hands hurt. Some were shouting. Others were crying and clapping at the same time. Maria opened her eyes slowly, like someone waking from a dream. For a moment she looked confused, as if she'd forgotten where she was. Then reality came rushing back. The ballroom, the guests, the uniform she was wearing. She stood up quickly, almost knocking over the piano bench. Mrs. Ashworth rushed forward, her heels clicking on the marble floor. Her carefully applied makeup was smeared from tears she didn't remember crying. She grabbed Maria's hands, not caring that they were rough and calloused, not caring about anything except the impossible thing she just witnessed. "Where did you learn to play like that?" Mrs. Ashworth's voice came out choked and strange. "I've never... How is this possible?" Maria pulled her hands back gently. She felt exposed, vulnerable, like she'd shown these people something private that was never meant to be shared. "I should get back to work," she said quietly. "There are glasses to collect." "No." The word came from Mr. Ashworth, who had pushed through the crowd. His face was red, his eyes wet. "You're not collecting anything. You're going to tell us who you are. Really are." The crowd pressed closer, everyone wanting to hear. Maria felt trapped. She looked toward the kitchen door, calculating if she could make it there before anyone stopped her. But the catering staff blocked that exit, all of them staring at her with the same shocked expression as the guests. A tall woman in a silver dress stepped forward. She had the confident air of someone used to being listened to. "I'm Victoria Chen. I manage the Riverside Concert Hall downtown." She spoke directly to Maria, ignoring everyone else. "I've been booking performers for 20 years. What you just played? That's not amateur level. That's not even good amateur level. That's professional. World-class professional." Maria said nothing. She felt her throat closing up. This was supposed to be her invisible life, the life where nobody asked questions, where she could work and send money home and not think about everything she'd lost. Now, how these people were looking at her, really seeing her, and it felt like being stripped naked in public. "Please," Mrs. Ashworth said softly. "Just tell us something, anything." The silence stretched out. Maria could hear her own heartbeat. She could feel dozens of eyes on her, waiting. Part of her wanted to run, to disappear back into the safety of being nobody. But another part, the part that had just played Rachmaninoff in front of a room full of strangers, was tired of hiding. "I studied at the conservatory," she said finally. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "In Caracas, Venezuela. You're a concert pianist?" Victoria Chen's eyes went wide. I was. Maria's voice was flat. That was a different life. The young man who'd laughed at her earlier pushed forward. His face was pale. I'm sorry, he said, and he sounded like he meant it. I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I shouldn't have. You didn't know because nobody asked. Maria cut him off, not unkindly. Just stating a fact. I've worked here 3 years. Nobody ever asked about my life before. Why would they? I'm just the help. The words landed like a slap. Several people looked down at their expensive shoes. Mrs. Ashworth's face crumpled. She'd passed Maria in the hallway hundreds of times, said good morning maybe twice. Never once wondered about the woman who cleaned her home. Never once saw her as fully human. What happened? Mr. Ashworth asked. Why aren't you performing? Maria laughed, but there was no humor in it. You don't watch the news? My country collapsed. The economy, the government, everything. You can't have a career as a concert pianist when there's no food in the grocery stores, when your savings become worthless overnight, when the conservatory closes because nobody can afford to keep it open. She was talking faster now, words spilling out after years of holding them in. I had a debut scheduled. A real debut at the main concert hall. Reviews were supposed to come from international papers. It was everything I'd worked for my whole life. Then the protests started. Then the violence. Then my teacher left the country. Then my parents were eating 1 meal a day because that's all they could afford. The room was dead silent. People who'd been laughing and drinking champagne 20 minutes ago now stood frozen, confronted with a reality that had never touched their comfortable lives. So I sold my mother's piano, Maria continued. Her voice was steady, but her hands were shaking. Used that money plus everything from my last performance to buy a plane ticket. Came here with 1 suitcase. Thought maybe I could start over. Maybe teach music or join an orchestra or something. She shook her head. But you need papers for that. Work permits. Degrees that American institutions recognize. References from people who haven't fled their own country. I had none of that. What I had was tourist visa and desperation. Victoria Chen was writing something on a business card. Do you have recordings? Videos of performances? I have nothing, Maria said. Everything's gone. My apartment, my piano, my certificates, my recordings. I couldn't carry any of it. And even if I could have, who would care? Nobody here knows Venezuelan musicians. Nobody here knows what the Caracas Conservatory means. I'm nobody here. You're not nobody. Mrs. Ashworth's voice broke. After what we just heard, you're definitely not nobody. 3 years, Maria said, and now there was anger in her voice. Real anger. 3 years I've worked in this house. 3 years I've cleaned your toilets and washed your sheets and folded your napkins, and I was nobody to you until 2 minutes ago. The only thing that changed is you finally heard me play. But I was the same person yesterday, last week, last year. My worth didn't change. Only your ability to see it. The words hung in the air like an accusation. Because that's what they were. Mrs. Ashworth opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. What could she say? It was true. All of it was true. An older man in the back, someone's grandfather by the look of him, spoke up. My father came here with nothing. From Poland. Couldn't speak English. Worked in a factory. He used to say the hardest part wasn't the poverty. It was the invisibility, people looking through you like you're made of glass. He looked at Maria with understanding. You're not glass. You're real, and you're extraordinary. Maria felt tears threatening and blinked them back hard. She couldn't cry, not here, not in front of these people. Crying meant breaking, and if she broke now, she might not be able to put herself back together. Victoria Chen held out her business card. Take this. Call me tomorrow. I want to schedule a proper performance, a real one, at the concert hall. Maria stared at the card but didn't take it. I can't, I have work. I have bills. I can't just, I'll pay you, Victoria interrupted. Standard performer's fee, probably more than you make in a month here, and that's just for 1 concert. If it goes well, and it will, there will be more. I'll cover your expenses, Mr. Ashworth added quickly. Recording costs, anything you need. Consider it an investment. And I'll help with the legal paperwork, the lawyer said, stepping forward. Getting proper documentation, work permits, whatever you need. Pro bono. Things were moving too fast. Maria felt dizzy. This morning she'd been invisible. Tonight she was drowning in offers and attention and possibilities that felt dangerous to hope for. Hope was expensive. Hope could break you when it didn't work out. I need air, she said suddenly. Without waiting for permission, she walked quickly toward the French doors that led to the garden. People parted to let her through, and she felt their eyes on her back the whole way. Outside, the rain had stopped. The air was cold and clean. Maria stood on the stone terrace gripping the railing, trying to breathe. Behind her, she could hear the murmur of voices. Everyone talking about her, about what just happened, about the maid who turned out to be a concert pianist. The door opened behind her. Footsteps approached. She didn't turn around. They mean well, Mrs. Ashworth said softly. I know it doesn't feel like it, but they do. Do they? Maria's voice was tired. Or do they just feel guilty? Tomorrow they'll go back to their lives and I'll still be me. Still cleaning houses, still sending money home. Still invisible to everyone who doesn't want to see me. Maybe, Mrs. Ashworth admitted. But maybe not. Maybe tonight changes things. Maria finally turned to look at her employer. Things don't change. Not for people like me. I learned that already. Mrs. Ashworth reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. This is 3 months' salary. Severance, if you want to call it that. You're fired. Maria's stomach dropped. Of course, she'd embarrassed them. Made a scene. Shown them up in their own house. I understand, she said quietly. No, you don't. Mrs. Ashworth pressed the envelope into Maria's hand. You're fired because you're not a housekeeper. You never were. You're a pianist. And I won't be part of the system that keeps you invisible anymore. She paused. Take Victoria's offer. Take all their offers. See what happens. And if it doesn't work out, if you need a reference or help or anything, you call me. But I don't think you'll need to. She walked back inside, leaving Maria alone with the envelope and the sound of her own breathing, and the first small seed of hope she'd allowed herself to feel in 3 years. Maria didn't sleep that night. She sat in her small studio apartment, staring at Victoria Chen's business card under the dim lamplight. The envelope with 3 months' salary sat on the table next to it. More money than she'd ever had at once in this country. Enough to pay rent for months. Enough to breathe for a little while. But breathing wasn't living, and she'd been just breathing for 3 years. At 6 in the morning, she finally picked up her phone and dialed the number on the card. It rang 4 times before a groggy voice answered. This is Victoria. It's Maria. From last night. I'm sorry for calling so early, I couldn't wait. There was a pause. Then Victoria's voice came back, suddenly alert. Don't apologize. I've been hoping you'd call.
Can you meet me at the concert hall today?
Say around 10? Maria agreed and hung up. Her hands were shaking again. She made coffee she didn't drink and watched the sunrise through her window. The city was waking up. People heading to work. Living their normal lives. She wondered if her life would ever feel normal again. The Riverside Concert Hall was bigger than she remembered. She'd walked past it dozens of times but never gone inside. Couldn't afford tickets. Couldn't bear to be that close to something she'd lost. Now she stood in front of the building, forcing her feet to move forward. Victoria was waiting in the lobby. She looked different in daylight, less formal in jeans and a blazer, but her eyes had the same sharp intelligence. Come on, she said. I want you to hear something. She led Maria through a side door, down a hallway, and into the main auditorium. The space took Maria's breath away. Red velvet seats stretched back in rows. Balconies curved along the sides. And there in the center of the stage stood a concert grand piano. Not just any piano. A Steinway Model D, the kind of instrument most pianists only dreamed of playing. Go ahead, Victoria said. Try it. Maria walked down the aisle like she was in a trance. Her footsteps echoed in the empty hall. She climbed the stairs to the stage. The piano gleamed under the lights. She sat down on the bench and lifted the lid. The keys felt different from the piano at the mansion. Smoother, more responsive. She pressed one note and the sound filled the entire hall, pure and resonant. She played a scale, then a chord. Then, without deciding to, she started playing again. This time she chose something different, not Rachmaninoff, something gentler. A Chopin nocturne. The melody floated through the empty hall like a conversation between the piano and the silence. She played for herself now, not for an audience. Played to remember who she'd been, who she still was underneath everything. When she finished, Victoria was sitting in the front row recording on her phone. I'm sending this to every music critic I know, she said. Your debut concert is in 6 weeks. Friday night, Prime slot, 6 weeks. Maria felt panic rising in her chest. That's not enough time. I haven't performed in 3 years. I need to practice. You need a piano, Victoria finished. Already handled. There's a practice room here you can use, anytime, day or night. I'll give you a key. I can't afford, it's free. Consider it an investment. When you're famous, you can pay me back by performing here again. Victoria smiled. Besides that video from last night, the server who filmed you, it's gone viral. 3 million views and counting. People want to see you perform. We could sell out this hall twice over. Maria's head spun. Viral? 3 million people had watched her play. She felt exposed all over again. Vulnerable. I don't know if I can do this. Yes, you can. Victoria's voice was firm. You already did it. Last night you walked up to a piano in front of hostile strangers and created magic. This will be easier. These people will be on your side. Over the next 6 weeks, Maria practically lived at the concert hall. She arrived every morning at 7 and stayed until the security guard kicked her out at midnight. Her fingers, softened by years of cleaning work, grew hard again. Her back ached from sitting. Her mind buzzed with music even when she tried to sleep. The lawyer, true to his word, was working on her documentation, getting proper work permits, making her presence in the country legal and official. He refused payment, said it was the least he could do. She didn't argue. Pride was a luxury she couldn't afford yet. Mr. Ashworth funded a recording session. A professional crew came to capture her playing. She recorded for 3 days straight, laying down tracks of pieces she'd loved since childhood. Beethoven, Liszt, Debussy. The engineer kept shaking his head in amazement. Where have you been hiding? He asked. She didn't know how to answer. The video from the mansion kept spreading. News outlets picked it up. Local papers wrote articles. Someone created a hashtag. The story was too good to ignore. Immigrant housekeeper turns out to be secret concert pianist. It had everything. Drama, class commentary, redemption. Maria hated being a story, but she understood it was part of the price. 3 days before the concert, her mother called. Maria had sent money home as usual, but hadn't told her parents what was happening. Hadn't wanted to get their hopes up in case everything fell apart. But someone from their neighborhood had seen the video, recognized her. Now her mother was crying on the phone. Mija, is it true? You're performing again? Yes, Mama. Maria's throat was tight. I'm performing. Your father and I, we wanted to come. But the tickets, they're so expensive, and the visa. Mama, stop. Maria had been waiting for this. Had planned for it. Mr. Ashworth is paying for your flights and visa. You'll be here in 2 days. Front row seats. Her mother's sobs came through the phone. Happy sobs this time. We never stopped believing in you, never. Maria hung up and allowed herself to cry. For the first time in 3 years, she cried not from sadness or frustration or exhaustion. She cried from relief, from hope, from the terrifying possibility that maybe, just maybe, she was being given a second chance. The day before the concert, she arrived at the hall to find a package waiting. Inside was a dress. Deep blue, simple but elegant. A note from Mrs. Ashworth read, "For tomorrow. You deserve to feel beautiful when you play." That night, Maria couldn't practice anymore. Her fingers knew the music. Her body knew the music. Any more practice would just be nervousness pretending to be preparation. She went back to her apartment and tried to sleep. Failed. Got up and paced. Sat down, stood up. Checked her phone obsessively. At 3 in the morning, doubt crept in. What if last night had been a fluke? What if she froze on stage? What if her playing wasn't actually as good as people thought and everyone realized they'd been fooled? What if she embarrassed herself in front of her parents who'd flown thousands of miles to watch her fail? She picked up her phone and almost called Victoria to cancel. Her finger hovered over the button. Then she thought about the last 3 years. About cleaning toilets while her hands remembered symphonies. About being invisible. About the person she'd been in Caracas with dreams bigger than the sky. About her mother selling jewelry to pay for her lessons. About her father working 2 jobs so she could study music instead of something practical. She put the phone down. She'd survived losing everything once. She could survive this. Morning came. Maria showered and put on the blue dress. It fit perfectly. She looked in the mirror and barely recognized herself. She looked like a performer again. Like someone who belonged on stage. The thought terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. Her parents arrived at noon, exhausted from travel but grinning. Her mother hugged her so tight she could barely breathe. Her father cried, which he never did. They had lunch at a small restaurant. Nobody talked about the concert. They talked about home, about neighbors, about everything except the thing they were all thinking about. At 5 o'clock, Victoria called. The hall is sold out. Standing room only. There are people outside hoping for canceled tickets. Are you ready? Maria looked at her parents, at the dress she was wearing, at her hands that had cleaned and scrubbed and worked but had never forgotten how to play. Yes, she said. I'm ready. She wasn't, but she was going to do it anyway. At 7 that evening, Maria stood backstage listening to the crowd noise filtering through the curtains. Hundreds of people, maybe thousands, all waiting to hear her play. Victoria appeared beside her, squeezed her shoulder. 5 minutes, Maria nodded. She was beyond words now, beyond fear, beyond everything except the music that lived in her fingers and the memory of every hour she'd ever practiced and the impossible journey that had brought her from cleaning houses to standing here. The lights dimmed. The crowd quieted. Someone called her name. She walked onto the stage. The spotlight hit Maria like a physical force. For a moment she couldn't see anything beyond the white light. Then her eyes adjusted and she saw them. Row after row of faces. The seats stretched back into darkness. Every single one filled. People standing along the walls. More people than she'd ever played for in her life. Her legs felt weak. She'd walked onto stages before back in Caracas. But that was a different person. A younger Maria who'd never lost everything. Who'd never spent 3 years scrubbing floors. Who'd never learned how cruel the world could be to dreams. She saw her parents in the front row. Her mother was already crying. Her father sat perfectly still, his hands gripped together. Next to them sat Mrs. Ashworth and her husband. Victoria Chen, the lawyer. Even some of the catering staff from the mansion, dressed in their nicest clothes. The young man who'd laughed at her sat further back, and when their eyes met, he nodded with what looked like respect. Maria walked to the piano. Each step felt surreal. The Steinway waited for her, its lid raised like a wing. She sat down and adjusted the bench. The movement was automatic, muscle memory from thousands of performances she'd imagined during sleepless nights in her tiny apartment. The hall was completely silent, waiting. She placed her hands on the keys and felt the cool ivory beneath her fingers. This was it. This was the moment where she either proved that night at the mansion wasn't a fluke, or she failed in front of everyone who'd believed in her. She took a breath. Then she began to play. The first notes of Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata floated through the hall. She'd chosen this piece carefully. Not the flashy, difficult music she could play. Something honest. Something that spoke about darkness and light and the space between them. Something that felt like her life. Her fingers moved across the keys with a gentleness that made people lean forward in their seats. The melody was simple at first, almost fragile. But underneath ran a current of something deeper. Sadness, maybe, or strength that looked like sadness until you really listened. Maria felt herself relax. The fear didn't disappear, but it transformed into something else. Energy. Focus. She wasn't playing for the crowd anymore. She was having a conversation with the piano, and the audience just happened to be listening in. The first movement ended, and she moved directly into the second. Lighter now, more delicate, like sunlight breaking through clouds. She thought about her mother teaching her to make arepas in their small kitchen. Her father coming home tired from work but always asking to hear her practice. The conservatory where she'd spent every free hour, so hungry to learn that she'd skip meals to afford extra lessons. Then came the third movement. The one everyone knew. Fast and furious and technically demanding. Her hands flew across the keys. The music built and built, racing toward something urgent and necessary. She thought about leaving home, the airport, her mother's face, the plane lifting off and watching her whole life get smaller through the window until it disappeared. She thought about arriving here with nothing. The first few months when she couldn't find any work and survived on 1 meal a day, learning to be invisible so people wouldn't ask for papers she didn't have, the shame of taking a cleaning job when she had a degree in music, the worst shame of being grateful for that job because at least it was something. The music crashed through the hall like a wave. Her whole body moved with it. People in the audience had stopped breathing. One woman clutched her husband's arm. A teenager in the balcony was filming on his phone, tears running down his face. The music critic from the Times was scribbling notes frantically. Maria's hands knew every note. They'd played this piece hundreds of times, thousands maybe, but tonight it meant something different. Tonight it wasn't just Beethoven. It was her story. Every immigrant's story. Every person who'd ever lost everything and had to rebuild from nothing. Every dream that died and somehow impossibly came back to life. The final notes rang out. She held the last chord, letting it vibrate through the hall until the sound faded to nothing. Then silence. Complete and total silence. Maria sat frozen at the piano. Had she messed up? Was it not good enough? Her heart pounded so loud she could hear it in her ears. Then the applause started. But this wasn't normal applause. This was an explosion of sound. People were on their feet instantly, shouting, cheering. Her mother was sobbing openly. Her father was clapping so hard his hands must have hurt. Mrs. Ashworth was standing with tears streaming down her face. Even the ushers along the walls were applauding. Maria stood and bowed. The noise got louder. People were whistling. Someone yelled, "Brava!" The sound washed over her like a tide. She bowed again, deeper this time, and felt something break open inside her chest. 3 years of holding everything in. 3 years of being small and quiet and invisible. It all came pouring out. She was crying now, too. She didn't try to hide it. Let them see. Let them see that she was real and human, and that this mattered more than they could possibly know. More, more, people chanted. Victoria appeared from the wings and whispered encore urgently. Maria nodded. She sat back down at the piano and the hall quieted instantly. For her encore, she chose something from home. A traditional Venezuelan waltz her grandmother used to sing. She'd never performed it at the conservatory. It was too simple, too folk, not classical enough. But tonight it felt right. Tonight she wanted to honor where she came from. The melody was sweet and sad at the same time. The kind of music that made you remember things you thought you'd forgotten. Her fingers danced through the familiar patterns. She hummed along without realizing it, her voice mixing with the piano. In the audience, an older Venezuelan couple held hands and cried. They hadn't heard that song in 20 years. Hadn't expected to hear it here in this concert hall, played by this woman who carried their country in her fingers. When Maria finished, the applause came again. But different this time, warmer, more personal. Like the audience understood she'd given them something private and precious. She stood and bowed one final time. Then she walked off stage. Her legs were shaking. Victoria caught her in the wings and hugged her hard. "You did it," she whispered. "You really did it." Backstage was chaos. People everywhere. The music critic wanted an interview. Someone from a recording label was talking about contracts. A concert promoter was discussing a national tour. It was too much, too fast. Maria's head spun. Then her parents pushed through the crowd. Her mother pulled her close and held her like she used to when Maria was small. "Mia, I'm so proud. So proud." Her father couldn't speak. He just held both of them and cried. Mrs. Ashworth appeared with champagne. The lawyer had flowers. Victoria was on her phone already booking more concerts. The young man from the mansion came backstage and apologized again, properly this time. Maria forgave him because holding on to anger felt pointless now. Later, after most people had left, Maria sat alone in the empty hall. The stage lights were dim. The piano still sat there waiting. She walked back out and sat at it one more time. She played quietly now, just for herself. A simple melody her mother had taught her when she was 6 years old. The first song she'd ever learned. She played it and thought about how far she'd traveled. Not just the miles from Venezuela to here, but the distance from despair to hope, from invisible to seen, from surviving to living. The next morning, the reviews came out. The Times called her a revelation. Other papers used words like extraordinary and transcendent. The video from the concert went viral. More viral than the mansion video. 10 million views. 20 million. Offers poured in from concert halls across the country. Someone wanted to make a documentary. A publisher wanted her to write a book. Maria signed with the recording label. Accepted half the concert offers and turned down the rest because she needed time to breathe. Helped Victoria create a scholarship fund for immigrant musicians. Started teaching free classes at a community center because she remembered what it felt like to have talent, but no opportunities. 6 months later, she performed at Carnegie Hall. Sold-out show. Her parents were there. Mrs. Ashworth was there. The entire staff from the mansion came and Maria made sure they had the best seats. She played Rachmaninoff again. The same piece from that first night. But this time, when she played, she wasn't afraid. She wasn't invisible. She was exactly who she'd always been, only now the world could finally see her. After the performance, a young woman approached her nervously. She worked as a janitor at a hotel, she said, but she used to dance ballet in Syria. Your story, the woman said quietly. It made me think maybe I could dance again. Maria took her hands. You can, she said. You absolutely can. She gave the woman Victoria's number, made her promise to call. Because she understood now that her story wasn't just about her. It was about everyone who'd ever been told they were nobody. Everyone who'd ever carried dreams in secret because the world couldn't see past their uniform or accent or circumstances. She'd learned that talent isn't enough. Neither is hard work. Sometimes you need luck. Sometimes you need someone to actually see you. And sometimes you need to be brave enough to sit at a piano in front of people who are laughing at you and play anyway. The guests had laughed when the maid sat at the piano. They'd stood frozen when they heard her play. But the real miracle wasn't the music. It was what came after, the reminder that everyone has a story. Everyone is somebody. And sometimes all it takes is one moment, one chance, one person willing to really listen, to change everything.